Some stories never truly end. They echo through quiet neighborhoods, courtroom corridors, and the steel-gray walls of America's death rows, long after the headlines have faded. This is the story of Stephen Barbee, a man whose life spiraled from ordinary routines into a nightmare that would haunt North Texas for decades. His name is now carved into the grim record of those executed by the state of Texas. But the echoes of his choices, his crime, and his final moments still ripple outward, leaving wounds and questions that justice alone can't always close. But before we step inside the execution chamber, take a moment to reflect. What makes someone cross the line between impulse and murder? How do the families left behind ever heal? Do you believe redemption is possible on death row? Or is forgiveness just a story we tell ourselves to make sense of the darkness? Stay with us through these final hours and share your thoughts in the comments below. Years before Stephen Barbee's face appeared on news broadcasts, he could have blended into any crowd. Born in the late 60s, Barbee's early life unfolded against a backdrop familiar to many. Quiet streets, Texas heat shimmering off the pavement, and the steady churn of work, marriage, and daily struggle. He grew up learning the value of hard labor, eventually building a reputation as a fit, capable man who ran his own small business in tree trimming and landscaping. But no one's life is as neat as it appears on the surface. Stephen struggled with failed relationships, emotional turmoil, and a desperate urge to keep secrets buried. By his late 30s, he'd gone through divorce, married again, and found himself juggling new responsibilities while old wounds still festered. Friends described him as polite, hard-working, but sometimes withdrawn, a person who rarely lets people close enough to see his pain. Behind closed doors, the cracks were widening. Barbee wrestled with jealousy, uncertainty, and a gnawing fear of being exposed. Those who worked alongside him noticed his mood could shift without warning, from a cheerful word at sunrise, a stormy silence by noon. If you'd asked anyone on his street, they would have said he was just another neighbor, maybe a little private. No one guessed that, inside him, something volatile was building, something that would one day explode. It was a Friday night in November 2005, the kind of night when families gather and the world feels predictable. In Fort Worth, Lisa Underwood was counting down the hours to her baby shower, a celebration of new beginnings. At 34, Lisa was well-loved in her community. Friends described her as loyal, nurturing, the kind of woman who brightened any room. Her 7-year-old son, Jaden, was the center of her universe. He was shy, quick to smile, and fiercely protective of his mother. But fate had other plans. The next morning, Lisa's absence sent alarm bells through her circle of friends. She never missed a call, never let a friend down, never vanished without explanation. When they arrived at her home, the door was locked. But inside, the scene was one of chaos and fear. Bloodstains in the living room, overturned furniture, a silence that was deafening. Police arrived quickly. Evidence of violence was everywhere. Trails of blood, signs of a struggle, and a sense that whatever had happened was personal. Not far away, Lisa's SUV turned up, half submerged in a muddy creek. The interior scrubbed clean, but not perfectly. Investigators combed the area, piecing together clues that pointed in one direction. The pattern was all too familiar. When violence erupts inside a home, suspicion often falls on those closest to the victim. In Lisa's case, her ex-boyfriend, Stephen Barbee, soon found himself at the center of the investigation. His alibi wavered. He insisted he hadn't seen Lisa, that he'd been at home all night with his wife. But the evidence started to tell a different story. In every murder case, there's a moment when the truth comes into focus. For detectives, it happened in a police station bathroom, a setting as ordinary as it was surreal. Under pressure, confronted by mounting evidence and his own contradictions, Stephen Barbee broke down. He confessed, not in the harsh glare of an interrogation room, but standing quietly in front of a sink, his words barely more than a whisper. He told officers he'd gone to Lisa's home that night to talk, to resolve old arguments. But things escalated. Lisa was 8 months pregnant, already exhausted from the day. Words turned to shouting, and then, in a sudden, irreversible moment, Barbee said he suffocated her, his hands over her mouth, his weight pressing down. Jaden, frightened and crying, witnessed what no child should ever see. Barbee admitted that he panicked. In his fear and desperation, he turned on Jaden too, ending the boy's life before he could run or call for help. The cold logic that often follows violence took over. Barbee loaded their bodies into Lisa's SUV, drove out of town, and dug a shallow grave in rural Denton County. He buried Lisa and Jaden side by side, covering them in soil and dead leaves, hoping the secret would disappear along with them. But secrets like this never stay buried. Searchers found their bodies just as Barbee described, confirming every word of his confession. The medical examiner's report was blunt and brutal. Both mother and son died of asphyxiation. For Lisa's family, hope gave way to grief. For Jaden's friends at school, the loss was incomprehensible. The news of the double homicide swept across North Texas, stirring outrage and sorrow. Local media covered every hearing, every new piece of evidence. Prosecutors charged Barbee with capital murder, 2 counts, each carrying the weight of a possible death sentence. The courtroom became a battleground of facts and emotions. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence: Barbee's confession, cell phone data, footprints, the shovel used to dig the grave, and testimony from friends and family. They painted a picture of a man desperate to hide the truth that Lisa's unborn child might be his, a man driven to murder by jealousy, shame, and the looming threat of exposure. Barbee's defense tried to humanize him. They spoke of a troubled upbringing, of mental struggles, of a man pushed to the edge by circumstances. They argued that the confession had been coerced, that Barbee was not in his right mind. But the jury saw the evidence for what it was: a careful, deliberate effort to erase 2 lives, to cover up a truth that Barbee believed would destroy him. After only a few hours of deliberation, the verdict was unanimous. Stephen Barbee was guilty on all counts. The sentence, death. For Lisa and Jaden's loved ones, it was a measure of justice, but not an end to the pain. If the trial was swift, the journey through death row was agonizingly slow. Stephen Barbee entered the Texas prison system in 2006, joining hundreds of other men waiting in the long shadow of execution. Death row at the Polunsky unit is notorious: cells just 6 feet wide, fluorescent lights always on, silence broken only by the distant sounds of steel doors and voices echoing down concrete halls. Barbee's years on death row were marked by isolation, failing health, and a constant parade of legal battles. He developed severe arthritis and degenerative joint disease, which left him with chronic pain and limited mobility. Over time, his arms atrophied, his hands curled, and his once muscular body withered under the harsh discipline of prison life. These physical ailments became the focus of a new round of appeals. Barbee's attorneys argued that his disabilities would make it impossible for him to be executed humanely, that the lethal injection process would cause unnecessary suffering. They argued that executing a disabled man violated the 8th Amendment's prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. Appeals were filed and denied, one after another. The courts, unmoved by his failing body or by pleas for mercy, affirmed the original sentence. Meanwhile, Barbee found solace where he could. He read scripture, wrote letters, and occasionally received visits from ministers or a few loyal friends. He asked for forgiveness, but never publicly addressed Lisa or Jaden's families again. For the families of Lisa and Jaden Underwood, the years were a blur of pain, remembrance, and attempts at healing. Birthdays and holidays came and went, each one marked by absence and memory. Lisa's mother, friends, and siblings struggled to make sense of the loss, to rebuild lives around a void that could never be filled. The case became a touchstone in local debates about the death penalty. Some argued that nothing, no sentence, no execution, could bring closure. Others insisted that the punishment was necessary, that the law had to respond with equal force to such cruelty. Through it all, the victims' families lived with the knowledge that justice, however defined, would never bring back what was lost. For Barbee's own family and supporters, the journey was no less wrenching. Some believed he was remorseful, that he'd been broken by regret and years of confinement. Others simply faded away, unable to reconcile the man they once knew with the horrors he had confessed to. 17 years passed. Legal delays, shifting execution dates, and a relentless tide of appeals gave Barbee more time than most. But in November 2022, time finally ran out. Inside the Huntsville unit, the air was thick with expectation. Outside, protesters gathered, some calling for justice, others for mercy. Reporters waited in the cold, updating the world on every move. That evening, Barbee was served his last meal. Under Texas law, there were no special requests, no lavish menu, just the standard tray of chicken, rice, beans, bread, and a portion of vegetables. He ate little, his appetite dulled by anxiety and resignation. Shortly after, guards led him from his cell to the holding area. He declined a final visit from his attorneys, choosing instead the company of a prison chaplain who'd visited him in his darkest hours. The chaplain prayed quietly, hands folded, voice trembling with emotion. As the appointed hour approached, witnesses, family, friends, journalists, and officials filed into the observation room. Some prayed, others simply stared at the glass, searching for meaning in a ritual as old as law itself. At 7:09 p.m., Stephen Barbee was brought into the execution chamber. He moved slowly, struggling to walk, his body betraying the years of pain and confinement. Technicians secured him to the gurney, working carefully around his rigid limbs. The fluorescent lights glared off the white tiles. In that moment, the entire room felt suspended in time. The warden read the official statement. Barbee was given a chance to speak. His voice, once strong, was barely more than a whisper. He thanked God, expressed love for his family, and asked those present to find peace. "I just want everyone to have peace in their heart," he said. "Make eternity with Jesus. Give him the glory in everything you do. I'm ready." Barbee closed his eyes. The drugs began to flow. Some witnesses wept. Others simply watched as his breathing slowed, then stopped. At 7:35 p.m., he was pronounced dead. For a few moments, no one moved. The ritual was over. Outside, the world kept turning. Cars sped down the highway, distant dogs barked, and the cold night crept closer. Inside the prison, Stephen Barbee's name was quietly crossed off the roster of Texas's condemned. In the aftermath, the questions lingered. What does justice mean in the wake of such a tragedy? For some, Barbee's death closed a painful chapter, a final reckoning for a man who made irreversible choices. For others, the execution was just another loss. Another life ended, with healing as elusive as ever. Lisa and Jaden's memories live on in photographs, in stories told at family gatherings, in the hearts of those who loved them. Their lives, and the way they were taken, became a lesson that echoes across Texas and beyond. Stephen Barbee's story, meanwhile, is a cautionary tale about secrets, desperation, and the terrible cost of violence. In the end, no amount of punishment can return what was lost. The questions endure. Can redemption exist for the condemned? Is there mercy and justice, or only the cold logic of law? The story of Stephen Barbee is not just about crime and punishment. It's about the fragile line between ordinary life and unthinkable tragedy, the wounds that never truly heal, and the echoes that carry on long after the final curtain falls. Now, we turn to you. Was justice done? Is closure ever really possible? Or are we just searching for meaning in the aftermath of horror? Share your thoughts below. And if this story made you think, don't forget to subscribe. Because behind every headline is a story that matters, and sometimes the only way to honor the past is to keep asking questions, even when the answers hurt.